He can't hear us.
How's that? Can you all hear me okay?
I think you're good to go now, Mr. Flynn.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Um,
Sorry again.
okay, don't kick us out. Okay, so anyway, we're all on page 38, and there's three types of passages, right? There's experiments, there's charts, tables, and graphs, and then there is the dueling scientist, right? Where scientist one says this, scientist two says this, and so on. I want to do that one first. And in this, and the deal is on the science section, what you should, your goal should probably be is do the passages that you're best at first, right? Like if we take a look at the scoring for this one in the science, this one that Mr. Williams was kind of looking at you, showing you before. There's generally about 6 questions per passage, right? So 1, 2, 3. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's say you didn't do one passage. Like I'm just not even going to do it. That would get you to a 29 on the science section, by the way. So the idea is this: depending on what your goal is of what you want to do the passages in the order that you're best at doing them. Like if you are best at doing the dueling scientist question first, do that one first, bubble it in, and then go on to the next ones that you do well on. If you're terrible at the dueling scientist one, do all the other passages first, bubble them in as you go, and then do the dueling scientist at the very end. Like spend more time on the other passages and then maybe just answer, maybe spend like just 2 minutes on that passage. Try to kind of find your best playlist is what I'm trying to say. Like if you're really great at experiment ones, do those ones first. Get all those questions right. And then move on to the next pieces. It kind of really depends on what your goal is. Like if someone's goal is like, Ms. Flynn, I am just trying to get a 21, right? Well, if your goal is to get a 21, my deal would be like, hey, you know what? Don't even do 2 of the passages. Spend all your time on the remaining like 4 or 5 passages. Get all those right. Spend tons of time on those. Get all those correct. And then when there's like 3 minutes left, go to the other 2 passages, guess really quick, and mark down some answers. And that would move you up a little bit. Kind of really depends on what your goal is for the science section. So let's talk about this. And I really want to talk again about the dueling scientist. Remember, things are located in similar locations. Like notice here, student 1, in the very first sentence, forage when moonlight is absent. Student 2, forage at sites with shelter. Student 3, forage at sites with shelter. And also, more likely to forage when moonlight is absent. Student number 4, foraging of mice is not affected by shelter or moonlight. So see how those were all in the same location of each paragraph. Also, at the end of each paragraph, like student 1, at the very end, shelter has no effect on foraging. Student 2, moonlight has no effect on foraging. Student 3, foraging sites with shelter during the moon, greatest number of visits, right? Student number 4, therefore do not affect the number of wood mouse visits for a foraging site, right? So there's things that are in the similar spots to help you out. So we're gonna do some timing on this. This one, you're gonna have 6 minutes and 8 seconds. Let me get my timer going here. Okay, go ahead and do passage number 1. ones. So if we look at the first question, it says a scientist claimed that adding shrubs, right? Adding shrubs to a foraging site will increase the number of wood mouse visits. This is consistent with who? Well, if we look closely, we will see that student number 2 says wood mice are likely to forage at sites with shelter. So it is student number 2. So I could probably get rid of B, and I could also, well, that's it so far. And if I look at question number 3, student number 3 here, wood mice are likely to forage at sites with shelter. So 2 and 3. So I can get rid of that. It's got to be 2 and 3. The question is, it could be D also, right? So I better look and see if 4 works. No, it says foraging behavior is not affected by the presence, so it must be letter C. It must be letter C for that one. Question number 2, based on student 3's hypothesis, a wood mouse will be least likely to be captured by a predator during the what? Well, student 3, okay. Student 3 says that sites, and they are more likely to forage, more likely to forage when moonlight is absent. So moonlight's absent, that's a new moon. And he also said foraging at sites with shelter. Both of those pieces are there. So it's got to be letter F. That's what student 3 says. Question number 3. Consider the results of the experiment during the new moon and during the full moon. For the site without shelter, are the results consistent with hypothesis of student 1? So during the experiment's down here, and it says during the new moon and during the full moon for the site without shelter. So I need to be looking right here, without shelter, right? And on this question, is it consistent with student number 1? And the answer would be yes, it is, because there were way more visits during the new moon than during the full moon, right? Because student 1 said they're more likely to forage when moonlight is absent. So I would need to pick letter B. Now be careful, don't select A, because you want to look closely. It says there are more visits during the new moon, whereas A says there were fewer visits during the new moon. So be careful of that parallel structure there. If you look at question number 4 here, before the experiment, which student would most likely have predicted that the number of wood mouse visits would be approximately the same for all conditions that were tested? Well, that's going to be student number 4 here, because student number 4 says, therefore, they do not affect, right? It's not affected by the presence of shelter or of moonlight. Either one doesn't affect them. And that's what student 4 says. Question number 5. Oh boy, we got a graph here going on. Let's look at this. Results of the study were shown by this was moonlight brightness. As the moon gets more bright, the number of wood mouse visits decreases. So I could think about this being as moonlight decreases, the mouse visits. I'm sorry, it's moonlight increases, my fault. As the moonlight brightness increases up to almost 100%, the mouse visits decrease. And that is only going to be working with student number 1 and 3, because both of those people said, hey, there's more visits when it's a new moon versus a full moon. The results of this experiment are most consistent with the hypothesis of which student. It's most consistent with student number 3, right? Student number 3. And by the way, I do want to point out to you, they do adapt the science section from actual studies that were produced. Like this one was produced in the Association of the Study of Animal Behavior. And that's why we always say in the science section, try not to read a ton of it, because it's written at a pretty high level, right? These are people in their PhDs, and so that's a pretty high level of reading. Question number 7, which of the following questions was addressed by each of the hypotheses? So addressed by each of them, but cannot be directly answered. That's going to be letter A. Does the presence of moonlight and shelter affect the chance that a wood mouse will be captured by a predator? addressed it, but they really can't answer because they didn't collect any data on getting captured, right? They talked about, predators being present and so on, but nothing was talked about a predator actually capturing a wood mouse. Okay, so let's move on to the very next passage. Okay, passage number 2. It's page number 40. On this one, it's going to be a little quicker, 5 minutes and 15 seconds, okay, because there's only 6 questions, whereas the other one had 7. And this is one of those charts, tables, and graphs, right? So again, when you look at the questions, it tells you, like, according to figure 1, based on table 1, according to figure 1, based on figure 1, it kind of tells you where to look in here to find the result, okay? So you're going to have 5 minutes and 15 seconds on this one. And you may begin. Let's take a look at it. It's really only like, there's only a figure and then there's a table of values, right? So on the first question, number 8, it says, according to figure 1, so we're looking at just this, at a temperature of 600 degrees, well, there's 600 degrees right there, which of calcium, aluminum, or gold has a resistance greater than 7 times 10 to the negative 8th? Now notice we're multiplying by 10 to the negative 8th in the chart, so greater than 7. Here's 7 right here. Well, I think calcium is the only one that's above that. Not too bad. Question number 9, based on table 1, which is the table over here, of the following 4 metals, which has the greatest ability to carry electrical current? Now, the problem with this question is a lot of people want to say aluminum, right? Because aluminum has the greatest current. I'm sorry, take it back. Keep looking on here. Silver, right? A lot of people want to say silver. However, silver is not listed here. Of these ones, which one has the highest conductivity? It is beryllium. Beryllium has the highest level of these 4. So kind of weird we have to deal with these 4. Usually the question says, which one has the highest of all the ones listed? We've got to look just here to decide what's going on. Okay. According to figure 1, again, so we're back to this, approximately how many times as great is the resistivity of aluminum at 600? So aluminum at 600 is right here. That's about at 600K, that's about a 6. It looks like it's at about 6. I'm just going to guess there. Then at 320. Now 320 is right here. If I kind of come up to here, 320 is about 3. So at 320, we're about 3. Well, how many times greater is that? I think that would be twice as big, right? Twice as large. Question number 11. Suppose that a certain metal has a resistivity of 3.46 times 10 to the negative 8th. Based on table 1, the conductivity of this metal is most likely closest to what? Now, 3.46 times 10 to the negative 8th. If I look here, this is times 10 to the negative 8th. 3.46, that is right between these 2 values, right? 3.56, 3.42. 3.46 is in that interval. So the answer must be something between 2.81 and 2.97. So let's look. Where's an answer between 2.81 and 2.97? Right here. Now, a mistake, I'll take it back. I just made the mistake. The answer should be this one, letter D. The mistake is to select letter B. Now notice, this is times 10 to the positive 7, whereas letter B is times 10 to the negative 7 power. If we look, that table is times 10 to the positive 7. Bit of a stinker to do this, especially since, the science is the last section of the test. Kind of a little stressed out as you're working it through. Yeah, be sure to select the letter D. Okay, when choosing a suitable metal for use in overhead electrical cables, engineers prefer a metal for which the expression density times resistivity has as small a value as possible. Which one of these would be correct? Well, I don't feel like writing them all down, but I went through them all. And this one's kind of awful. You've got to multiply the density times the resistivity for each of those. And which one's the smallest value? Aluminum is the smallest value, right? So that one's kind of awful. It's nice it's the first choice. It's nice that there's only 4 things to go through, but kind of awful that you've got to multiply those out. And no calculator, right? So you're just kind of estimating of what it would be about. So maybe the best way on that one is maybe to round them. Like, I would call that a 3 times 3 and say, okay, that's going to be 9. I might round this to be 9 times 2. That's going to be 18. This is becoming 20 times 2. Well, that would be 40. And if I round down here, I could round that to be an 11 times 2 is 22. Okay. Estimating. Yeah, aluminum is going to be the lowest. So they're trying to make sure that the ones they've picked here, that when you do your rounding, it's not going to interfere. This is what it comes out to be exactly. But again, you don't have a calculator available to you on the science test. So round them as you go. So that was kind of a bit of a stinker as well. On this last one, based on figure 1, the metals listed in table 1, which were most likely measured at a temperature closest to which of the following. So this is kind of weird. So what I did was, it's just based on figure 1. Now, figure 1 has 3 different elements, right? Calcium, aluminum, and gold. So I looked at calcium. And in here, I looked at calcium, okay, calcium. What is the resistivity of it? Calcium is at 3.36. So in my graph here, I'm going to go ahead and look where 3.36 is, a little bit less than that, right? And I'm going to calcium. Is it 3.36? Yeah. And calcium, it looks like at 3.36, it hits right here. And what temperature is that? 300. Now, if I look at these, everything else is really far from 300. Like, I might think, well, maybe they meant to say 400, right? Well, 400 is way over here. I think we could safely bet that it's not going to be 400. And 200 is way over here. Yeah, 300 of all these choices, 300 is the closest one to what we think might be the correct answer. All right, so that wasn't too bad of a chart, table, and graph. Now, let's do an experiment, right? The experiment is on the very next page, page 42. It's passage number 3. And this one is, we got 7 questions. And so we're going to have like 6 minutes and 8 seconds for this one. One thing I do want to point out to you is, let's see, where is it here? Nope, this one doesn't do that. It's okay. But notice this structure here. Science really likes giving questions that have answers like this. Notice F and G are both the same mass of water. So you have to decide, is it mass of water or volume of water? Eliminate and then kind of guess off of that. All right, so you're gonna have 6 minutes and 8 seconds. Go ahead and get started. Okay, question number 14 says, according to the results of experiment number 2, among the 5 groups tested, the light intensity increased. The average number that were hatched was what? So we have to use both of these, right? As the light was intensifying, right? So yes, so the intensity is getting larger as we go, Q, R, S, T, U, V. Notice they're in the same order here. So as the light intensity increased, what happened to the hatchings? The hatchings went up as that happened. So the answer has to be letter G. So that's relating 2 different charts. Number 15 does the same thing of relating charts. Suppose that a scientist wants to develop an artificial system for hatching these things in the laboratory. Based on the results, which pH value would most likely maximize the chance of hatchings? Well, if I'm looking here, O had the highest amount of hatchings. O's pH was 9. So the answer would be letter C. So notice on 14 and 15, on 14, we had to go to the table and then go to the graph. Whereas on 15, we had to go from a graph to the table, right? Kind of interesting. Question number 16 is just a science question, really. Science knowledge, about time. Consider the units of measurement ml. What is ml measuring? It's not measuring the mass of the water, it's measuring the volume of the water. So that's why I eliminated F and G. And then lux, what is lux measuring? Well, if we weren't sure about it, it did say light intensity right here in the table. So it has to be light intensity, right? Can't be the duration. Must be letter J. But that's that elimination idea I was talking about. Now, question 17, consider the statement. The number of these that hatched on average was greater for the ones kept in the dark than for the ones exposed to the light. Well, I think we've agreed that the ones in the dark are here, right? Very low, like no luminance, no light intensity. I think that's false. There's more hatching when there's more light, right? So the answer would be no, but you've got to read carefully. They talk about the groups. The average number of these hatching groups R, S, T, and U was greater than Q, right? This one says greater than U. We've got to look closely. Q was the one with no light, whereas U had the full light. So you've really got to read close to detail, right? Look at that parallel structure. Number 18 is a science knowledge question. And I know, which of the following equipment was most likely used to collect the data that was averaging? You might be inclined to say an electronic balance, but they're not weighing these things. And I'm not even sure how you could weigh these things. They're so tiny. They're most likely using a light microscope, so that way they can count how many of these things are hatching. 19 was a bit of a stinker. What's the total length of time? If we look closely to a group of beakers that was exposed to the light, if I look closely right here underneath the table, it says each beaker was incubated and received 12 hours of light per day at an intensity of this at the end of 7 days. So it would be 12 hours per day times 7 days. When we multiply those, we get letter C. The last one, number 20, the length of time that the beakers in a group were incubated affected the average number of these hatched in the group. The answer is no, because just like we said over here, everything was incubated for 7 days, right? So it's not going to have any effect on it. The time was the same for everybody. All right, now there's not enough time for us to do another passage, but I do want to talk about the scoring on this a little bit and kind of revisit this. This is the one that we were looking at, right? So I just want to point your attention, we're going to be doing this also on the one that we're doing Monday. So the paper I'm putting on top is, this one here is today, right? And this one is Monday that we're going to do. And I want you to look at the differences. Let me see if I can get this a little bit closer so it's easier to tell. Notice the one we're doing Monday, you could miss a question and still get a 36. But here's where it's interesting. The one we're doing Monday, you could miss 29, you could get 29 questions correct. Whereas today's, you have to get 31 correct answers to get a 26. So the one that we're doing Monday is a little bit more difficult, right? And so what ACT does is, this is called norming. What they want to do is, when you go in to take the ACT, they want to guarantee that if you took any, on that day of the test, if you took any tests that year, you would have gotten the same score that you're getting right then at that moment. So it's independent of the test. What you want to come out of the ACT is, when you take the ACT test, you want to come out feeling, man, that was a tough test, but I felt prepared, but boy, it was difficult. If you're coming out of the test thinking, man, every single question on that was so easy, well, you know what? It's easy for everyone else also. And that means that, boy, it's going to have a wicked curve on it. So everyone is slightly different. So you always want to look at these. We've included these at the end of each section, so that way you have them. Sometimes they vary by as many as 3 questions. So kind of, be aware of that. Other things you all want to talk about?